You may not recognize him today. He's not wearing a tutu, a little bit disappointed. But we are covering Flattening the SOC, Rethinking Tiered Operations to Improve Outcomes with the Zane Jarvis. The man doesn't need an introduction. I'm sure he will do a quick intro, but he is one of my fellow AusCert alums, and he has worked in a variety of roles across his career. Before joining the cyber mob, he worked as a system administrator for a managed service provider and a software engineer for a defense contractor. Well, if everyone can please welcome Zane onto the stage for me.
Good morning. Cool, mic's working. Thanks for having me. Thanks to AusCert for having me back again this year, and thanks to all of you for coming and spending your time with me. I'm going to be talking about flattening the SOC. If you're not here to listen about that, you might be in the wrong room, or I'm in the wrong room, but I'm hoping, because I'm on stage, it's not me. So just a bit of a disclaimer. I went hard on AI-generated shit. Sorry, I shouldn't swear. Slides. All right? They're going back now, it's recorded too. If I didn't use AI, this is what they would have looked like. I suck at drawing. Look, that literally looks like a 4-year-old drew it. But no, that was actually me on the tablet that wasn't working properly before, which worked last year. Go figure. This year, I'm not using this magic symbol to take photos of my slides because all my slides literally suck, all right? Don't read them. They're just there to prompt me. They're not really there to help you. So these are my personal views, and all the examples are generalized, not to name specific companies. All right, so what do I mean by flattening the SOC? Because you're probably thinking, isn't tiering necessary for scale? Let me be clear, this is a case study, this isn't a manifesto. So what works for us may not work for you. There's no single best way to approach this, but some approaches may work better for you, depending on your size, your environment, culture. I'm going to talk a little bit about theory and throw some of the research I've done whilst going and preparing for this that shows flatter structures are actually quite viable. But you're also probably wondering, what's actually broken with a tiered SOC, or is it just uncomfortable for you? I'm just going to give you my opinion on this situation. I'm going to be honest, we are still on this journey. We have not finished. We are midway through this, so I don't have all the answers for you, but I can talk to you about where we're up to right now. We've got a good team that's been helping get there. It's not just a one-person show to make this work. It takes a full army, basically. So a little bit about me. For those that don't know me, I've worked in security for 19 years this year. I've worked in financial services, aviation, consulting. I've done offensive security, defensive security. And I started in AusCert in 2007. So I've been around for a little while. The last 7.5, nearly 8 years, I've been in financial services. Probably explains why I've got a lot of grey hair. But it's not just the work I do that causes my grey hair, it's also my kids. They need some of the credit for my grey hair and my whitening beard. And this photo of my family actually is the digital version of what my wife gave me a couple of years ago for a Father's Day present. And given Mandalorian and Grogu was launched last night, I didn't go because I wanted to be fresh and ready for this talk today. But a bit of a tribute to the Mandalorian and Star Wars, as I'm a massive Star Wars nerd. So for an internal team, we have a pretty typical stand-up for a mid-sized business, I think. We had an outsource level 1 with some outsource level 2 resources as well. 24/7, 365 outsourced services. That's pretty normal. And then a lot of in-house experience for escalation and business hours or extended business hours with an on-call function. I think that's a pretty normal setup for most people, would you agree? It's pretty normal. We're not big enough to have, that magic room with big pew-pew screens on the walls and, layers and layers of staff. We're not that big. So we don't have poo-poo screens. All right, but let's get to the reason why we flattened our SOC. Actually, the decision was kind of forced upon us. The key trigger was that our external partner was changing their business model. So the level 1 and level 2 services that we had with our outsourced partner, they were going to remove the local resources from Australia who did our business hours and some of our extended early and late starts. And they were going to change the pricing model. Obviously, you all know what that means. So we were losing skilled resources and having to pay more for it. Fortunately, though, we'd already been assessing our operating model. It was the year prior, thankfully. We'd been going through analysing our tools, our people, our processes, our structures. We hypothesised what type of structures might work. Do we send more out to the SOC? Do we bring more in? Do we give them different tasks? All the different things you go through analytically to try and figure out, are you getting best bang for buck? Are we doing the best job that we can be doing? This all fed into, usual costing analysis and things like that you have to do in business. We also identified that there was a lot of operational friction caused by excessive handoff, escalation, churn, delays between detection and decision making. So we could have gone back to the market for another provider, but instead, to maintain visibility, and contextual understanding of our business and things like that, we decided to reinvest the money that we were spending with our external provider and deliberately use automation to help in-house that task. And we also created a significant headcount with that extra budget internally to help support that. So let's look at the most common 3-tier models, because it's about SLAs, it's not actually about outcomes. The tiered model is optimised for process efficiency. It's not about security outcomes. So the decisions requiring specific business context frequently resulted in escalation to internal resources who often had minimal actual analysis done before they were being flipped over the fence to us. So a good example is an after-hours ticket. They'll put a couple of basic notes and then go, here, team, in the morning, you handle it, or call someone up at 2 a.m, hey, I don't know what to do, you handle it. There was not a lot of value being added there. We also observed where the workflows, where the analysts were escalating uncertainty towards the actual staff, that may have made or triggered a detection. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know how many people watch Dr. House. Or watch Dr. House. I know it's an old series years ago, but he always says people lie, patients lie. Well, it's kind of true in cyber when you go to, a random person in a call centre. They may lie, but they may actually just not know what you're talking about when you go, did you, call run DLL and try and download this binary and execute it? What the heck? They don't know. You're talking tech to them. They can't answer those questions. So we often found that our level ones would ask them, copy in the command line, did you run this? A non-technical person doesn't know that. So that was another issue we found with particularly after hours and offshore resources. So some of these are process problems, and I admit that, okay? Some were training and confidence issues, and some of these were just structural characteristics of the operating model, which is what I'm wanting to talk about today and what we've tried to address. So for me, you get your monthly report from your outsourced partners, and I'm ragging on them a bit here, and I'm not meaning to sound like that, but I'm just trying to call out some of the issues that we had that forced this, is that you get a dashboard that looks like this. You know, 100% SLAs met, we're all green, we look good, we're awesome. Meanwhile, things are burning down behind the scenes. SLA compliance is not necessarily representative of good investigation, good decision quality, or good security outcomes for your organisation. So we increasingly felt with the workflow we'd built, it rewarded safely to escalate when they just didn't know. So they would just throw things over the fence. They met their SLAs, and then we had to deal with the problems internally. There's some public examples about where this has happened. There's a major US retailer several years ago that's been widely discussed, where there was a specific thing called out that their tier ones had escalated malicious findings to their tier two, and they weren't actioned appropriately because of the way the handoff worked. Now, this isn't the only reason they got breached. There are many other things that led to that, but it is a symptom of a larger problem where things that we should be able to get right, we're getting wrong, and it's giving the advantage to the bad guys. So when researching for this presentation, I actually realised that the SOC model that we have today is more by accident than deliberate design. In the 60s, we had telcos building up their NOCs to help manage their infrastructure, and in the 60s, 70s, we had security functions for like the NSA and other government entities creating their watch floors, which were triggered by key incidents at the time around certain military operations. In 88, we had the Morris worm, which forced CERT-CC to be created and helped build incident coordination capabilities. And in 89, I think it was, the UK government came out with a standard, which is now known as the ITIL and ITSM frameworks, which actually formalised the more three-tier process for dealing with the process efficiencies and escalation chains in IT environments. And a lot of that can actually be traced back to the early 1900s, funnily enough. This thing called the scientific principle of management, I think it was called it, or Taylorism is another name for it. Basically what they do is they break down tasks to their smallest form, and then people just do those repetitively, and then when they have a problem on the manufacturing floor, they escalate that to their manager, and they fix things. And there's a lot of things that we do now is actually based on that type of industrial processing, and it's funnily the similarities that we see now with our level 1 SOC doing the same thing. But what's changed in the last 25 to 35 years since these processes were first sort of developed? A lot is the answer. Traditional tiered SOCs emerged in an era when security operations were more repetitive, predictable, and easier to segment. Early SOCs inherited operational structures from industrial management because that's what they knew at the time. We didn't really sit back and look at what the problem was. We just copied and borrowed, and that's what we do as humans. So over the last 25, 35 years, we've got cloud and we've got SaaS solutions, like all these identity-driven environments. People have got stuff in different cloud platforms as well. So you've got this vast spread of skills, this vast attack surface compared to 25 years ago, where you've probably heard like the candy security hard outer shell. We had firewalls and we had soft GUI inside like an M&M. The SOCs back then suited that type of model because we had those perimeter controls. Everything had to come in through that front door. Now we've got unknown numbers of front doors with all of our infrastructure. At the same time, automation has reduced the need for human to perform repetitive tasks by filtering out, known false positives, enriching things for us. So similar shifts in complexity have led industries such as emergency, medicine, aviation, and military operations to move closer to the point of decision, prompting a reconsideration of whether escalation-heavy models remain fit for purpose in our environment. I want to do an analogy here with the emergency department. So let's imagine it's 2 a.m. and you've got chest pain, all right? And you walk in to the ED. Maybe it's anxiety, maybe it's indigestion, maybe you're having a heart attack. You don't know, all right? The first decision matters enormously when you go into these situations. Are you critical? Can you wait? You know, what pathway do you need to enter in to be seen earliest? So now imagine when you enter that door and you get up to the desk, they turn around and say, all right, the initial triage is going to be performed by the least experienced person in the department, and they're going to go over a checklist with you. How do you feel at that point? If you didn't have anxiety beforehand, you may now have that on top of whatever else it might be. You know, it's a stressful situation, and you've been put under more stress in that scenario. Because intuitively, we all understand something quite important here, that triage is not an administrative work. It's not a checklist, and it's not a checkbox process that we all go through. It's actually expert decision-making under uncertainty. And in medicine, hospitals increasingly push senior expertise into earlier stages of the diagnosis process because it has proven to have major changes in the way the outcomes are for their patients. Some of the examples are that they actually spend less time in hospital because the right medical decision was made sooner. They spend less time in the waiting room, and they also have less people walking away before being seen. So what do? We put our least experienced people to make the first and most critical decision. How many people have, seen a real detection be closed as a false positive? Cool, some people put their hands up. Yeah, thank you. Emergency departments don't function because every clinician is a senior doctor, but they function because junior staff are supported, senior expertise is accessible early in the decision-making process, and the decisions are collaborative when the uncertainty level is very high. Now, as a personal example, cancer diagnosis is very much like that. You actually have a board of specialists who will review your medical file and make a decision around your treatment. So there's lots of examples of other industries making these expert level decisions. The interesting part about this change for us was that the flatter SOC that I'm talking about, it originally started more like of an inverted SOC where we wanted to push some of that triage down. In my head, that's what I imagined. But it's more of a flatter SOC these days is what I would call it. But in practice, we had already started, in our experience, unconsciously doing this. So one of the things I didn't mention earlier was that we increasingly bypass parts of our own processes and our own tiering model to send alerts directly to the senior staff because we couldn't trust that the level ones could do it. And good reasons for this. The alerts were more complex, okay? They weren't able to be built into like a single linear process. They weren't a deterministic do this, do this, do this, do this type of thing. They needed judgement and context of the business and things like that. So we observed inconsistency in a lot of the initial triage decisions in our level ones and because of those handoffs. So contextual understanding does matter. Multiple weak signals need correlating, and you often don't see that in a ticket-driven system. And I mentioned the process stuff before. So I just want to be clear that this simply wasn't a capability problem or a criticism of all the analysts involved. It probably does sound a bit like that, but I'm not ragging on them. But many of the decisions required organisational context, pattern recognition, and judgement under uncertainty. I've already talked about that. Got ahead of myself there, sorry. So in the medical industry, and I've been talking about senior doctors earlier in the decision, and there's a lot of studies around how this reduces those things I mentioned. But if we look at the similarities between the SOC and the medical industry, you know, one of the first things that we need to determine, is this real? All right, and then for a doctor, is this, you know, is this life-threatening? You know, we don't often have to deal with life-threatening scenarios, but, you know, depending on where you work, there could be. How urgent is this? You know, can we support this process or do this ticket in the time that it needs from a prioritisation point of view? Same in an ED. They need to prioritise who gets seen first based on the criticality. So the thing I want you to take away from that is that it's a strategic decision made under uncertainty. All right. We place a lot of training and influence around the way we build our mental models. And this goes back to our junior staff haven't had that time to build up those mental models and those patterns recognitions. But we do this in our phishing awareness training, for example. You know, we tell people, you know, this is a little bit old school these days, but look for the padlock. Those who've been around 20 years will remember that was the key advice we gave for phishing emails. The other one we have been giving is, you know, look for grammatical errors, but that's all changed now too. If you think about the way AI has influenced a lot of these and the attack structure has changed all this, those mental models that we developed 20 years ago that have proved useful for us for a long time, we're now having to build new mental models and new training regimes to help with that. And that's something a lot of analysts don't get a lot of time to build because they're not seeing the full spectrum of the problem when they're just handing it over. They're not getting that opportunity to build a mental model, and they can get stuck in a level 1 role for a very long time because they're not getting that experience they need. We also see a similar model in modern military. They have a thing called command intent, so where they have a decentralized decision-making process where the commander of the operation will give them guardrails, gives them rules, and they give them the authority to act. Now, when something happens, this reduces the decision latency from the people on the ground. They don't have to go through an escalation chain to get approval to make that decision and make that action. So like the original tiered SOC model, we've also borrowed other ideas from other industries. So the key difference is that what we've tried to do with our flatter model is we've deliberately and iteratively and continuously adapted the way we've been working. And the operating model has come out of all these observations. One of the things I like to do in our team is we encourage them to challenge assumptions. We like to share ideas. We like to identify what isn't working and experiment safely. So we have this kind of model of try, learn, adjust over and over and over again. And some of the examples for our operating model was a simple thing like on-call. That we had this old rule that if you're on call, you're also the key incident person for the week. And we found that that could get quite fatiguing. Like if you got an on-call at 2 a.m. and then you're trying to work all day to run the incident, it doesn't really work from a health and safety perspective either. So we split the roles and we tried that. There was actually a little bit of pushback initially, like, oh, but you know, who's going to do this or do this? And understanding where that cutoff was became critical. So we had to use very good communication to be able to help with that. that's just one example. There's been many other things where we've done that. So one of the first ingredients for our success was attitude. All right, so like I said, challenging the status quo. A flatter SOC only works if the team's willing to question the workflow itself. All right? It's not just work harder, it's actually working smarter. And curiosity is one of those attributes that makes a great analyst. I'm sure you'll agree. So rather than stomping it out by saying that's a bad idea or we shouldn't change that, we actually encourage it. Before we made all the decisions in the operating model, to the flatter model, we discussed it with the team ahead of time. Those experiments that we had fed into the broader team ethos really helped to build confidence that the change is normal and it's not threatening, as many people feel when change comes. So communication is the second ingredient that we have. All right? In a flatter model, communication actually becomes operational infrastructure. So if you reduce the handoffs and expect people to make broader decisions, they need fast access to context, their peers and senior support. So one of the things we've done is we separated our social and operational chats in whatever chat system you use. I'm trying to not name vendors. Operational chats kept the focus on incidents and the technical work that we're dealing with. It kept signal to noise ratio really good. All right? And then we had a social chat because you need that team building. You need that joke, you need those memes, you need all that fun that people have, and that's how you build a stronger team. But I've got to say, the most useful thing we did actually came towards like 2021, around that time. I called it the social experiment. Now, what the social experiment was, it's a persistent meeting that runs 24/7, 365. It just sits in everybody's calendar. It's always there. We actually have breakout rooms and stuff in there these days, but originally we didn't. When somebody needs help now, you just say, let's jump in social. Or you'll be sitting there working on something and you'll see the social experiment pop up. And you know someone's gone in there to get help. It's amazing the instinct and the reaction that we've built around that as a team. And it's been our most successful change ever. And it's kind of in a hybrid team where some of us are working from home, some of us are in office in Brisbane or Sydney or Melbourne. That simple little thing has replaced that classical of everyone being in the office and huddling around a desk and working together. But it also means we can be very targeted in the way we do that, because maybe you just want 1 or 2 people to help with a particular problem. You don't need 20 people to help with a particular problem. The third ingredient that I'd like to call out is trust and delegation of authority. And trust goes both ways, up and down the management chain. So open communication will build trust within the team, which is why communication is critical. But trust also comes from leadership. So in our model, leadership gave us a delegated authority to make security decisions within agreed guardrails, going back to military intent. The goal was not to remove oversight from our leadership. The goal was to reduce unnecessary approval latency. And when the decision was clear enough to act, you act. That does mean people will get things wrong occasionally. We have. One day, we implemented a rule that inadvertently just dropped every single inbound email for 2 hours. It was a bad day. It was a really bad day. But we owned it as a team. We improved the process, and we didn't go looking for a scapegoat. The fourth ingredient is training and mentorship. So a flatter SOC does not mean that we only hire senior people, okay? You still need pathways for junior people to grow into the role. In fact, flattening makes mentorship more important, not less, because it gives everybody the opportunity to teach somebody else something. Analysts need to learn the environment, the playbooks, and the escalation thresholds, and the business context, all right, to build those mental models and those patterns. We recently hired 2 very experienced analysts into our area, all right? Both many years of experience, but whilst they know security very well, they didn't know our business. So they still have been going through mentoring and training and onboarding so that once we let them loose, they're ready to go and they're ready to support people. The 5th and final ingredient, and this is where most of our challenges have been actually. It's not the people and it's not the process, it's actually been the tooling. Not because our tools were bad, but because many of them reflected a legacy operating model. And we were trying to move away from that, but we didn't move the tools first. We moved the processes and the concepts and all the other stuff first, and then we tried to make the tools work. So the legacy ticketing system, we had so many queues. I think the picture shows a whole bunch up there. As an example, we had the level 1 queue, and we had our internal queue from other teams, and we had security incidents and security queries. We had DLP, we had email, we had ITIL incidents for infrastructure we ran. It's a lot of front doors, and it's a lot of things to watch. It's actually been really hard. So what we did was we built compensating controls around this. We built dashboards that looked at all these systems and monitoring the queues. And we have a senior resource that we've called like the triage role. Basically, they're overseeing everything, making sure they're not necessarily acting on the incidents, but they're making sure everybody else is enabled to do their work and keeping an eye on patterns. How am I going for time? 5 more minutes. All right. So we started moving towards the simpler model. We're still in process. As I said, we're still on this journey, and we're going to more of a single door process. All right. The other major thing that we did around this was automation. So we had a project called Automate Everything, because it was a very original title that I came up with. But the idea was that if it wasn't automated, we'd assess it. Can it be automated? And then how much of that can be automated? And we did it. We just tried to automate as much as we can. And that really helped reduce the noise and enabled the analyst to make those decisions faster and improve our outcomes. So what I'm not recommending, okay? I'm not recommending removing hierarchy altogether, right? You still need leadership, but I'm talking about the SOC model itself, just the people working in those incident response, all right? I'm not talking about removing any governance or accountability at all either. I'm not arguing that tiered SOCs are universally wrong. Like I said at the start, it will come down to your business context and your situation. And I've also said that not every analyst needs to be senior to enable this. You need to have pathways for juniors to come in and support them and build that experience in those mental models. And I'm not saying that we would replace every single analyst or junior analyst with AI or automation. All right? And I'm not proposing chaos at all. All right? Flattening the SOC is not about removing the structure. It's about removing the friction between detection and decisions. All right? So my recommendations, if you choose to go and do something similar, start small. All right? Completely changing the model in one go will be extremely difficult. Not impossible, but it will be very hard. You've got to build up that muscle memory and that attitude in the business. Increase the ownership of the cases and remove the unnecessary handoffs sooner. So encourage the level 1s to go, well, what would you do next? What do you need to know to answer that question? And encourage them to do that. And we have a very strong process around doing that. Use automation for deterministic processes, but also, given where we are today in the world with AI, you may want to use agentic AI. We're not there yet, but we're looking at that ourselves and where it will make sense and can actually add value. And don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. Try something different and keep trying until you get results. I've talked all about that. Sorry, I didn't keep up with my own clicks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Zane. If anyone does have any questions, we'll try and sneak a couple through. So please pop them in through the app. Otherwise, if you have one now, pop your hand up and I'm happy to run the mic over to you.
Or don't.
Perhaps you might need to be a little bit general with this, but like how many staff do you have, and do you have a volume of tickets, however you might want to refer to them, that you can actually deal with within a day? Or do you end up just with
Yes.
up to the history?
I skipped over that bit, sorry. Because I was mixed up with my slides. So coming through the front door, like the main queue, we have about 200 tickets on a daily basis, and then we probably have 100 to 150 coming in all the other doors sideways. We have, in the incident response part, one thing I didn't go into was that as a part of the restructure, we split our proactive under a different leadership and the reactive under different leadership to simplify it. Reasons being, you know, response always got priority over proactive things. So the responsive side's around 12 people, I think it is. That includes interns, graduates, you know, analysts, senior analysts, principal analyst, and a manager.
So do you actually keep up with the tickets, or do some of them just get like
Actually,
into the ether?
so the statistic is, because I was expecting this question around this, so the mean time to resolve, so for us that's critical, respond, detect, they're all fuzzy statistics, and we've had these chats before. But resolve for us means it's back to normal operational means, all right? So we went from about 10 to 20 hours down to 2 to 4, where the average is that we're talking about. From an automation, I'm going to predict a question around automation. So fully automated things varies between 10 to 30% per month. We can have up to 60% of all tickets automated, but the difference between the ones that aren't fully automated are only partially automated. So fully automation includes both there on that statistic. So there's a fair chunk of work that will just land in your lap and you go, oh, bam, done.
Thank you.
Lovely. And because we did start late, we can be a little bit cheeky and squeeze in one more question. Awesome. I'll come over.
Yeah, so we're kind of in the middle of a transition similar to this, and I'm just wondering, we kind of did a bit of a big bang, moving from 5 different queues to a centralized case management.
Mm-hmm.
How do you kind of balance having to do that kind of big bang for management to be happy, like further up, versus the tried and true of like, okay, do incremental changes that do work at a micro level, while they might not show the macro results straight away?
Yeah, so that's one of the things we're actually in transition of at the moment is the multiple queues to the single queue type process. So I don't have an answer on that one, I'm sorry, but happy to swap notes afterwards to see where you're going with it.
Yeah, sounds good.
Lovely. Can everyone take this time and thank Zane again? I'm sure if you do
Thanks
have any
all.
questions, he will be around all day to answer them.